Ever get the chills thinking about those old witch trials?
Oh, for sure.
Well, buckle up because one very powerful figure in history was totally consumed by witches.
Interesting. Who are we talking about?
King James VI and I. You send us some excerpts from the Witch Hunter King episode of Noble Blood?
Oh, yeah, that's a wild one. A real deep dive into how fear, superstition, and power can get all tangled up.
So who was this guy, and what made witches his biggest nightmare?
To understand King James, you got to go back to his childhood.
Okay, back up we go.
It was, to put it lightly, rough.
In what way?
Try being a baby when your dad, Lord Darnley, is murdered.
Oh, wow.
And then your mom, Mary Queen of Scots, is forced to give up the throne.
That's a lot for a kid to process.
Yeah, you could say he had some baggage.
Sure.
And then there was his tutor, George Buchanan, a strict disciplinarian who,
Oh, I know that type.
yeah, he constantly reminded James of his mother's supposed wickedness.
Oh, really?
Even called her a poisoning witch.
So James grows up thinking his own mother was into the occult.
Pretty much. And that had to warp his worldview.
Right. Absolutely. Making him suspicious of women and terrified of supernatural forces.
Exactly. And that fear. It wasn't just a personal thing. It had a huge impact on his ruling style.
So we've got a king with a seriously messed up past and a huge fear of witches. How do we get to actual witch hunts?
Well, there's this crazy case known as the North Berwick Witch Trials.
Okay, I've heard about those.
Yeah.
What went down?
It all starts with a maid, Galis Duncan.
Okay.
She's accused of witchcraft and confesses to all sorts of crazy things under torture.
Hold on, torture. Like, what are we talking about here?
Thumb screws, crushing her fingers. You can only imagine the agony.
Awful.
And once she starts talking, she implicates over 70 other people in this supposed witch conspiracy.
Over 70. This was a full-blown panic.
Oh yeah, big time. People were terrified, convinced these witches were meeting in secret, conjuring storms, plotting to kill the king.
Wait, conjuring storms? Like some 16th century weather warfare?
That's what they thought. See, around that time, James is sailing to Denmark to meet his new bride, Anne. But every time they set sail, these massive storms pop up and nearly sink their ship.
And of course, people blamed witches.
Bingo. And James, with his deep-seated fear of witches, totally bought it. He took it as a personal attack, proof that these evil forces were out to get him.
So how does this traumatized king go from fearing witches to actually hunting them down? Was it just the storms?
Well, the North Berwick trials were a major turning point, but there's another piece to this puzzle.
Let's hear it.
James's own writing. He wrote a whole book about witchcraft.
A book. This king wrote a book about witches and demons.
He did. Called it Demonology. It was like a witch hunting guide for the time. He lays out all his theories about witchcraft, including this idea that women are weaker than men and easier for the devil to sway.
Talk about misogyny.
It's pretty messed up. And this wasn't just some academic exercise either. His book really fueled the witch hunts, leading to countless innocent people being tortured and killed.
This is all so disturbing, but so fascinating too. It's like looking into this dark corner of history and seeing how fear can take over a whole society.
It is. And as we dig deeper into James's life and these trials, you'll see how far the consequences of his obsession reached. It's easy to judge James and everyone who believed in witches back then.
Yeah.
But we got to remember the context, right?
True. It is the 16th century.
Yeah, science was just getting started.
Right.
People were really struggling to make sense of the world around them.
Yeah. Storms, diseases, sudden deaths.
Oh, the...
Easy to blame it on the supernatural.
Especially with someone like the king pushing that view.
And it wasn't just storms.
No.
James kept having this dream about his mother's severed head appearing before him.
Whoa.
He saw it as a sign of witchcraft, like a warning.
And remembering that he grew up believing his own mother was a witch,
Yeah.
that kind of trauma sticks with you.
Totally. Changes how you see everything.
Like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly. The more he believed in witches, the more he saw them everywhere.
Confirmation bias.
Right.
We all do it.
For sure.
Look for info that backs up what we already believe.
Even if it's based on fear.
Or bad information.
Okay, back to the North Berwick trials.
Okay.
You said Galis Duncan's confession led to over 70 other people being accused.
Yeah.
What actually happened during the trials?
They were almost theatrical.
Really?
Like public performances.
Mhm.
Confessions through torture, accusations flying everywhere.
So they were putting on a show.
Yeah, to scare people.
What kind of accusations were they making?
Oh, crazy stuff.
Like what?
Digging up corpses. using body parts in rituals,
Oh, gross.
even throwing cats into the sea to make storms.
Live cats.
That's just what they said.
Those poor cats and the people accused must have been terrified.
Absolutely. And women were the easiest targets.
Makes sense.
James thought they were weaker, more likely to be tempted by the devil.
So it wasn't just about witches, it was about controlling women.
You got it.
It's all so messed up.
It is, but there are some interesting stories from the trials.
What?
There's this one about John Fian,
Who's that?
a schoolmaster
Okay.
accused of trying to use witchcraft to get with his student's sister.
Oh, a love spell.
Well, he asked for a lock of her pubic hair,
Oh, for the spell.
but the mom swapped it out for cow hair.
Wait, what?
Yeah, so the next day, Fian is followed around by a lovesick cow.
You're kidding?
I'm not.
That's hilarious.
I know, right? But people really believed this stuff.
Darn.
But even in these dark, ridiculous situations, you
Yeah.
see people trying to resist, to hold on to some control.
I guess so.
Hmm.
But most of the accused didn't have happy endings. What about Galis Duncan? What happened to her after she confessed?
She was probably executed.
Yeah.
We don't know all the details.
But her confession started it all.
Yeah, tons of other people ended up imprisoned and tortured.
And what about James? Was he just watching all of this happen?
Oh no, he was super involved.
Really?
He even examined some of the accused herself. Yeah, like Agnes Sampson.
Who's that?
They called her the eldest witch.
Oh, wow.
They shaved her head
What for?
to look for the devil's mark.
Ugh.
Found a mole.
Near her genitals, you said.
Yeah.
And that was proof.
To them, it was
Awful.
Agnes confessed to all sorts of crazy stuff under torture.
Like what?
She said she made a wax figure of the king and burned it to try and kill him.
They were just making stuff up to stop the torture.
Yeah, forced to become the monsters James thought they were.
This is a scary reminder of how quickly fear and suspicion can spiral out of control.
Especially when it's coming from the people in power.
But you said James kind of changed his mind about witches later on?
He did.
That seems weird after he was personally interrogating them.
It does. He wrote a letter to his son, Henry.
What did he say?
Henry was bragging about hunting witches. And
Uh,
James told him to be careful.
He told his son to back off. What made him change his mind?
Hard to say for sure.
Hmm.
Maybe he got wiser with age. Maybe he saw how the witch hunts were being used for bad reasons.
To manipulate people.
Yeah, or to get revenge.
So even the witch hunter king had some doubts.
It seems like it.
It's also interesting that the witch hunts were less intense in England than in Scotland.
Right.
So even though James brought his fear with him when he became King of England,
Yeah.
it didn't really take hold the same way.
It makes you think that even our deepest beliefs are shaped by the culture around us.
By what's considered normal.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we've covered James's traumatic childhood, the North Berwick trials, his book on demonology.
Wow.
What about the legacy of his obsession? How did this fear of witches affect society and culture after he died?
That takes us to another fascinating part of the story.
Oh.
The connection between King James and William Shakespeare.
Okay, so this connection between King James and Shakespeare, how did this witch-obsessed king influence the bard?
You got to put yourself in Shakespeare's shoes.
All right.
Imagine you're a playwright back then.
Yeah.
And the king is obsessed with witches and demons.
You want to keep him happy,
Exactly. You can't just ignore that.
especially when it's tied to his power.
Right. And Shakespeare was brilliant.
Yeah.
He found ways to work those anxieties about witchcraft into his plays
So it entertained the king.
and reflect what people were scared of at the time.
So which plays are we talking about?
Well, Macbeth is the big one.
Makes sense. It's set in Scotland,
James's homeland.
and it has those witches right at the beginning.
Double toil and trouble.
So good.
Iconic.
Macbeth is all about ambition, power, evil,
Yeah, themes that would have hit home for James.
who saw himself fighting those dark forces.
And those witches don't just make potions.
Right.
They control the weather, conjure storms.
Just like the North Berwick trials.
Exactly. It's like Shakespeare took that real-life fear,
And turn it into art.
gave a voice to what everyone was feeling.
It's amazing how this stuff still resonates with us.
I know, right?
But it's not just Shakespeare.
Yep.
There are modern takes on James's story, and those witch trials.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Look, Outlander.
With the time traveling.
It has a character named Gellis Duncan
The same name.
from the trials.
Wow, what a connection.
So James and those witch hunts still fascinate us.
Big time.
Why do you think that is? What is it about this period that grabs people?
Well, it's dramatic.
Yeah.
Accusations, trials, executions.
Intense stuff.
Scary, even now.
It reminds us that we're not so different.
Right. We like to think we're more enlightened.
But we still have that fear.
That suspicion, that desire for control.
It's a warning from history.
We need to think critically,
Yeah.
question what we believe.
And challenge the people in power.
Exactly.
If King James were alive today, what do you think he'd make of the world?
Oh, man, good question.
All the technology.
I think he'd be fascinated.
And maybe a little horrified.
Yeah, both.
He might see the internet as a tool for witchcraft.
Right, full of demons.
But I bet he'd also be surprised by how much we're still struggling with the same old stuff.
Fear, suspicion, wanting to be in control.
It's a bit depressing.
It is, but we're also capable of compassion.
And understanding.
We've learned some things since then,
And by studying history,
facing those dark parts.
we can try to avoid making the same mistakes.
Exactly.
Well, that's our deep dive into the Witch Hunter King.
Hope you enjoyed it.
Learn some new stuff.
Maybe changed your mind about a few things.
This is just one perspective.
On a really complicated guy.
And a crazy period in history.
So keep exploring.
Keep asking questions.
Keep diving deep.
And if you want more deep dives into history, science, culture,
And everything in between.
make sure you subscribe to The Deep Dive
We'll be back.
with more journeys into the depths of knowledge.
See you next time.